Hello, welcome to this session on reflective practice, part of today's Frontline Network Working Together annual conference. We'll just give people a little time to come in. I can see that people are still joining us. We have with us our speakers, Joan and Mike, and they'll be able to introduce themselves once I stop and hand over to them. We still have people coming in. So what I'll probably do is just give it a minute or so, pour myself a glass of water, and then we'll probably make a start. Yep, we still have people joining us, so. Could I ask, go back, oh, I'm going the wrong way. There we go. So it looks like my colleague Amy, who works with myself at St Martin's Charity, has put a note in the chat box. So if people could put their comments in there, we're hopeful that there's parts of the talk where we will ask for people's feedback in that chat box. You won't see it on the screen, the big screen we're sharing, because otherwise you won't be able to see the presentation, but you should be able to view it yourselves from your own screen. We also have a separate Q&A box, which we're not sure whether the functionality of that is working or not, but people are welcome to try it. If it is, if people could try and focus questions that they'd like answered in the Q&A box, and comments, observations, answers to the specific questions that Joan or Mike might ask you to the chat, that would be really helpful to help Joan and Mike be able to navigate responding to those towards the end. Okay, I'm going to suggest that we make a start. So what I will do is I will mute myself and turn off my video, and I will hand over to Joan and then to Mike. Enjoy the session.
Thank you, Mark. Right, good afternoon, everyone. And as Mark said there, we've got the chat box to use. There will be quite a lot of audience participation, I hope, in this session. And I'm really looking forward to spending the next couple of hours with you. So yes, the Frontline Network Conference, I hope everyone's having a wonderful day. Hi, Karen. Thank you for your comment. And this is a section on reflective practice. So I'm Joan Coulton. I'm an associate trainer at Homeless Link. And as I say, I'm very happy to be with you this afternoon. So I'm going to be doing a bit of a Jonathan Van Tam and asking Mark for the next slide as we go through this presentation. So next slide, please, Mark. Thank you. Hi, David. So Homeless Link, we're the national membership charity for organisations who work directly with people who become homeless in England, and we work to make services better. And our ultimate aim is to end homelessness by campaigning for policy change. We deliver in-house and public training courses across the country, and our courses are based on policy research and legislation to help frontline workers like yourselves develop the skills that you need to tackle current issues and to improve the service that you offer to the people that you support. So I have almost 20 years experience in support work. The majority of that was frontline, and then I have been a team leader, and in lockdown, for part of lockdown, I was interim service delivery manager for a charity in Leeds called Basis, and I know that you've had Kat Totty, I believe, with you as well today from Basis. So next slide, please. Thank you. So reflective practice. So what does reflective practice literally mean? So it's from the Latin reflectere, which means to turn, like the little fox there in the picture, and practico, to do or to perform. Mark? So reflective practice is literally making the time to look at what we've done, consider what went well, think what we could learn from, and reflect on how we feel about our ways of working. Mark? So I've got a brief Zoom poll just to start the session. So I'm just wondering, I know how lockdown certainly reflected on the team that I was working with, and it was a horrible time, wasn't it? I think for all of us, we would agree. So I'm just thinking that now that we're post-pandemic and we're coming back to the workplace and the pressures are on, I know a lot of the teams that I come into contact with at the moment have had quite a lot of staff turnover. They've had a lot of new staff coming in, established staff leaving maybe in lockdown. So I'm just wondering, how easy do you find it to find the time for reflective practice in your day-to-day work? So if you could just put in some answers to the Zoom poll, and then we'll move on then. Thank you.
Can I just check from behind the scenes, is that visible to everyone, the answers to the poll?
We've got no's and yeses coming up there.
Can you see that okay, Joan?
I can see the poll, but I can't see any responses to it yet.
Okay. I think most people have answered 21 out of 22. So I'm going to end the poll and hopefully that will share it. There you go.
Oh, thank you, Mark. Right, so looking at the poll there, so 5 out of 21 response. Thank you to everyone who responded. So 5 people out of 21, so around a quarter, said that your organisation supports you to be reflective with protected time, which is wonderful. Just over half said that your organisation supports you to be reflected, but you still struggle a little. And 5 out of 21, so again, just under a quarter, said that they don't currently have time. Thankfully, no one said that they've never heard about reflective practice, so that is good. I'm sure if we'd have asked this question a few years ago, a lot of people wouldn't have heard of reflective practice. So this is really interesting. Thank you. Yeah, really interesting responses. Thank you. Right, Mark.
Are you back seeing your presentation, Joan?
Yes, I am. Thank you. So I think that if we think of reflective practice as an extra thing that we have to do, it can seem really daunting. We've all got so much at the moment that we have to do. As frontline support workers, we've always got far too much that we have to do. But certainly with lockdown and then coming back to the office, and as I say, a lot of these staff changes that I'm certainly seeing in the organisations that I'm delivering training to at the moment, I think it can seem quite daunting if we think here's something else that we have to do. But like trauma-informed practice and like psychologically informed environments, reflective practice is a way of working, a way of being, rather than a thing to do. And it's an approach that should be embedded in a whole organisation at every level. And it should be considered whenever decisions are made that impact on staff or impact on service users. So it should be something that whole organisation embraces and has as part of their ethos. Thank you, Mark. So what might be some of the benefits of reflective practice? And I would be really, really grateful if you would put some ideas in the chat box so that we can see what people's ideas are. Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Yes, it absolutely does give us the opportunity to think about what worked well and to identify areas for improvement. I think that's really, really important, that we don't see reflective practice just as, let's look at what went wrong. So it really does give us a chance to reflect on what went right as well. That's wonderful, and to learn from it. Ashton, yes, it does, doesn't it? It's that time to become more self-aware, to reflect and examine and explore. And yes, it gives us the opportunity, as David said, to have those open discussions. Charlie's mentioning consistency, which is so important, I think, for teams, and especially when we do have new people coming in, to see that there is a consistency to an organisation, I think is so important. Definitely, Wendy, the increased self-awareness. And that's a lovely word, Emma, honesty about yourself and your work. That's so true. Yes, that's sort of real authenticity. And as James says there, it fosters a culture of sharing best practice with our colleagues. It absolutely does. And again, more important than ever, I think, when we've had a period where maybe we've not been able to spend as much time as we would as a team, I think that's more important than it's ever been. And you're absolutely right there, Lisa. It does allow you to consider your own trauma and triggers. And I think this fits in wonderfully with what Emma said about honesty. It's that sort of transparency with yourself, isn't it? That real authenticity. And Claire says it helps to have conversations that develop our trust in each other. And I think that is so important. So thank you. Some wonderful reflections there on the benefits of reflective practice. Thank you so much. They're absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Mark. So we all agree that reflective practice is a great thing. So what about some ideas about what might stop us from doing this? What gets in the way of reflective practice in our day-to-day work? Yes. Absolutely. Yes, definitely. Yeah. Yes. So a lot of words there about busyness, about pressure, and I think that's a really, really good comment there, Ashton, about just being too drained to think about reflecting at the end of the day. Sometimes we have all on just getting through the day, don't we? And then at the end of it, I know certainly I've done this in frontline work. I've got to the end of the day and thought, I'm switching my brain off now from work. I don't want to think anymore about that. So you're absolutely right. And that, of course, that feeling of being drained comes from what other people have said there about time and busyness and pace and crises that come up and the weight of caseload, and that all adds to it. And of course, as James says there, about being short-staffed, because whenever we have staff absences through illness or through waiting to recruit or something like that, the responsibility then gets shared around the rest of the team. Workload pressures and crisis, absolutely, Karen. Anxiety, Lisa, I think that, again, that's really honest. And you're right, I think sometimes to really reflect, to really take that sort of deep dive into ourselves and think about what we're doing, how we're doing it, could we do it better? We do tend to reflect, I think, more naturally on what went wrong rather than what went right. And I think that can really start some anxiety for a lot of us, especially when we've got so much other pressure on. And absolutely, Wendy, just no time. Yeah. And fear. Wonderful, Shauna. I think that absolutely ties in with Lisa's use of the word anxiety. And yes, that fear and anxiety, certainly for me as a frontline worker, of did I do something really wrong there? Am I to blame for something? Was it my fault? And you're absolutely right, Emma. It really is hard to prioritize sometimes, because when we've got the kind of crises that you've mentioned and there's so much going on with our clients, we have to do that, don't we? We can't say to clients, I can't be there for you at the moment because I have to go off and reflect. So you're absolutely right. It's hard to prioritize, especially when we have crisis situations coming up. And yes, yeah, that sums it up really, Claire, doesn't it? Time doing the job rather than thinking about how we do it. We're so busy doing it that we don't always have that time to reflect. And Robert, I think that's a really important point that you've made there. And I do actually look at this in a slide or two along about working lunches and not having breaks and things. And James echoes that there with the struggle to fit in any breaks, let alone time for reflective practice. Sometimes it's, have I got time to have a sandwich? And I'm sure that everyone here today will have got to 3 o'clock in the afternoon and thought, why have I got a headache? Oh yes, it's because I've not eaten or had a drink today. So yeah, I understand all those things. And thank you very much, everyone, for your honesty and openness in that. Thank you. Mark? So following on from all those things that we've just said, this is just a little quote. If you don't make time for your wellness, you will be forced to make time for your illness. Mark? So that can obviously apply physically. So if we don't make time, so as a personal example, if I don't make time to exercise and to do my physio exercises that I've been given for my knee that plays up sometimes, if I don't make time to do that, then what I will find is that after a week or two of not doing them, I will waken up with a swollen knee that then needs a lot more work doing to it. So then I'm back to my doctor, I'm taking painkillers, I'm in pain a lot of the time, I find it hard to drive. So I often think I just don't have time to do the physio exercises. It's 15-20 minutes a day, who's got time for that? But then I do find that my knee sort of says, well, you didn't look after me, Joan, so I'm sorry. So and I'm sure that applies to so many things, doesn't it? To look after what we eat, whether we get some exercise and all this kind of thing. And eventually, if we don't make time to stay physically well, then we're making time to be physically ill, unfortunately. Mark? Mentally. And the next mark, please. And emotionally, which are obviously so tied together. So again, if we don't make the time to look at our emotional and mental well-being, if we ignore insomnia, if we ignore our feelings of anxiety, if we don't address and examine our low moods or our irritability, all those signs that we have of not being well, then eventually, we can only do that for so long. If we ignore the signs of our insomnia, eventually we will be so exhausted with our poor quality of sleep that we'll become ill. So although we all know this, don't we, on a sort of an intellectual level, we all know that we have to look after ourselves, otherwise we become ill, whether that's physically, mentally, or emotionally. It still doesn't mean that finding the time to do those things is easy. It just means that we do know, we're aware, we know that there will be a price to pay if we don't look after ourselves. And I do think that this applies very much with the things that we've talked about already in this session with reflective practice, that if we don't make time to do that reflection, then there may be consequences. Mark? So it could seem that we don't have time for reflective practice. It could absolutely be that we don't have time for reflective practice. But thinking now about that sort of, if we've not had time to put into the wellness of our reflective practice, what might the illness or the cost be of not doing that? Mark? Burnout. And this is something that I've seen. Absolutely, Robert, thank you. Yeah, definitely. Repeating mistakes and burning out. And this is something that I certainly saw on my team. I saw on teams that I came into contact with through lockdown. I know we've always, as frontline workers, we always have the issues that we've had in the last 2 years. I know. What I found, and I don't know if anyone else found the same thing, is that what the pandemic seemed to do for me was to put that situation very much sort of under a microscope. So everything that was difficult before became so much more in lockdown. It became a lot more intense. Absolutely, David, we wouldn't have the chance to learn from our mistakes, and that's so valuable, isn't it? You know, mistakes are they're valuable tools to learn from, aren't they, if we use them in the right way rather than as a stick to beat ourselves with. Mark? High staff turnover. And again, I don't know, you know, it'd be really interesting to know about the organisations who are here today and how you're finding your staff turnover at the moment, how it's been sort of historically and over the last couple of years. But I think when people get burned out and stressed and exhausted and people move, I've certainly known quite a few friends or colleagues or people working at other organisations who've left support work recently and gone into doing something completely different because they've totally got to the end of what they felt they could cope with in support work. Mark? Missed opportunities to grow as a team, and this is something that a couple of people said in the chat box, that when we come together to reflect, we've got all those opportunities to grow and to share and to learn from one another, and that's so valuable. And if we don't have the opportunity, if we don't have the time to do that, then if we want to call them mistakes or learning opportunities or triumphs, all those things don't get brought and shared, and the chance to learn from them and develop from them never happen. Mark? Lack of team energy. And again, when I asked what the barriers were to reflective practice, a couple of people mentioned that, well, everyone really did, saying about, you know, pressure and time and crises and everything. And a couple of people said about just getting to the end of the day and just not having the energy for anything. And again, I know that this is something that can come with support work, but when you get a whole team where the energy's gone and the passion's gone and everything, and people are just trying to make it through the day, it's completely understandable. But again, if we've not got the opportunity to come together and learn from one another and support one another as a team, then that can really, really have an impact on the energy that the team has. Mark? And again, loss of individuals' enjoyment of work. The work that we do as frontline workers can be exhausting and heartbreaking, as we know, but there can be a lot of joy in what we do, a lot of joy and a lot of reward. And I think when we don't have the chance to share that with colleagues, when we don't have the chance to talk about the really great stuff that happened or the not so great stuff that happened, but how we learned from it, then if we don't share that with other people, then it can take away from a lot of the enjoyment of the work that we do. And I'm just having a look here at James' comment. Yeah, thank you, James. I think those are really, really valid comments that certainly, you know, working through lockdown, working through the pandemic, seeing the impact that had on an absolutely fantastic, dedicated, devoted, passionate team that I worked with, but also other wonderful teams that we worked with at organisations all across Leeds. It was just such a difficult time, such a stressful time. And I think a lot of people who would probably have stayed in support work for many years got to some point, or even got right to the end of the pandemic and thought, I'm done. I'm done. I have nothing more to give. And I think there were a lot of things that that contributed to that. Obviously, you know, we weren't spending time together. We were supporting people who in many cases with the people that we support, people who are really not well and who had lost their support networks, both professional support networks, personal support networks. We as a team had lost our support networks as well. So we were people who were struggling, supporting people who were struggling. And it was just so difficult, wasn't it? It was incredibly difficult. And I don't think that there's, certainly I don't know, I'm speaking for myself and my family and colleagues and all the people that I know, I don't think there's anyone who got through the last 2 years unchanged. And again, so I'm just, yeah, absolutely. James' comments there about people facing unique stresses, and I think that that's a really, really good way to sum it up. That the things that were happening in lockdown were unique stresses, and as frontline workers, as people working for charities and other organisations, we're used to dealing with stress. We're used to dealing often with things that if we told someone standing next to us at the bus stop or the train station or something what we've been through in a day, they probably wouldn't believe it, because that's support work, isn't it? You are so used to dealing with the unusual and the extreme. But I think to deal with it as we did through the pandemic, where we were seeing the impact it was having on the people that we support, and then for a lot of us, we were having to then go home if we lived alone and not be able to see our friends, not be able to see family, not be able to go to maybe groups that help us to stay emotionally well, not be able to do all the things, you know, not be able to sort of have a night out, going to the theatre, going for a meal, meeting up with friends in the pub, having mates round and sitting around the table, eating and laughing, just all those things. It was absolutely right. You know, you just summed it up there, James. It was unique stresses. Thank you, Mark. And new staff, if we don't reflect, if we don't make reflective practice part of what we do, new staff miss the chance to learn from experienced team members. So I'm just thinking, if you've got a situation where you have team meetings once a month, and you've got a member of staff at their first team meeting, and an experienced member of staff, maybe someone's been there a month longer than them or 10 years longer than them, brings something to share with the team and says this is what happened, and everyone talks about it and what they learned from it, and maybe what's going to be done differently going forward, or they talk about something that went really well and they share how that sort of came about. That means that new member of staff has the chance to learn there and then, and they might learn something there that might come up for them in a month's time, and they can apply what they've learned, and they've got that knowledge to help them. They've got that resource. So instead of the new person waiting until things go wrong and then learning from it, they've got the chance to learn. Plus, it means that new person on the team maybe goes away, especially if there's someone who's quite new to support work, maybe goes away and thinks, actually, this isn't a team of perfect people who never, ever make mistakes and have learned everything there is to learn. This is a team of people who are still learning, who don't always get it right, who are, and we all know that, of course, when we've got the new person there, we all know that we're far from perfect. But to them, especially, as I say, if it is someone who's quite new to support work, they probably think that we've got all the answers and we never get anything wrong. So to be able to say honestly, actually, what I did last week, and this is what happened, and oh, it was terrible, and this is what I thought about it, and I'd really like some input from people, and that can help a new member of the team have the confidence then to put their hand up the week or the month after and say, I need some support here. I need to learn from people. And I think that's really, really important. I think that's a gift that we give to new people on our team. I think that is a really, really powerful statement there, Lisa. You say that it's a powerful thing to do, and that's a powerful statement that you've made there. Learning and identifying something that wasn't done well and owning it, sharing it with others. You are absolutely right. It's scary. And someone said earlier about one of the barriers is about feeling ashamed, feeling that we're going to be blamed for something or blaming ourselves for something. And it's scary, isn't it, to say, I messed up. I did something, I didn't do it as well as I could, or whatever. It's scary. It's scary admitting that to ourselves. It's scary admitting it to others. But you're right, it's powerful to be able to say, do you know what? I did this and I didn't do it well, and I could have done it better, and I wished I'd done it better, and I want to do it better next time. And can you help me? Or I knew I'd not done it well. I wanted to do it better next time. I worked out a way, or I found a resource, or I did something. And I'm going to tell you so that hopefully I can help someone else with this experience. And it might not be exactly the same thing, but there might be someone else there sitting there with that sort of feeling inside them thinking, actually, if everybody's been okay when you've said that, maybe I can share what's going on for me. So thank you, Lisa. That's a really wonderful way to put it. Thank you. Yes, and the fact that confidence within a team, if people don't get the chance to discuss things while they're happening. So again, I'm talking a lot about sort of lockdown, and that's not to say that I don't think we all had huge issues and challenges before lockdown. But as I say, I think it very much put it under a spotlight because we'd gone, those of us who worked in quite big teams that we used to see all day, every day, and all those sort of informal chances for reflective practice, those mostly went away. So I think absolutely right there, Shauna. The confidence that people were maybe building, or that people had, was eroded. And I think that this, again, with people that I know, with friends who are also in support work and aren't now, I was hearing that a lot. I just don't feel confident anymore. I'd thought that I had this. I thought it was what I wanted to do, but I don't feel confident in this kind of work anymore. And I think had they had those chances to do all that formal and informal reflective practice just as part of their day-to-day work, I think maybe the confidence wouldn't have gone. So that's a really, really that's a really good way to put it. Yes, and reflective practice really can put people out of their comfort zone, definitely. And to some extent, that's part of what it should do. Because if we're reflecting, we're looking in a mirror and we're thinking, I've got to sort of see what's going on. And I really want to be the best support worker I can be. I want to be a good colleague. I want to get the satisfaction from my work, for me to know that what I'm doing is the best I can do. But it can be incredibly uncomfortable. Any kind of self-examination, self-reflection can be uncomfortable, definitely. And you're right, Lisa, you do have to think, what's the worst that could have happened? And again, that can feel very uncomfortable for us, can't it? Thinking, I did something, and often something will happen, and then afterwards we'll think that could have been a disaster. It usually wasn't, but again, we can learn from that. We can learn from that. What's the worst that could have happened, and what can we put in place to try and change that situation going forward? So thank you very much for things that people have shared. Thank you. Mark? So I'm sure people have probably seen this graphic before. Right, sorry. So yes, we've got our sort of window here, our window with the optimum arousal in the middle. So we've got our window of tolerance, of course this is. So we've got our optimum state there in the middle, where we're sort of carrying on with day-to-day life. We are coping, we're doing okay, we're getting, we've got ups and we've got downs, but we're staying within our tolerance, we're staying within our sort of comfort zone, a really great word that phrase that someone just used. We're kind of staying within our comfort zone, we're staying within what we can cope with. Mark. And then we've got this this part at the top, this sort of just outside our window of tolerance, where we're going into hyper arousal. And this is where we feel emotional, we can feel overwhelmed, where all the sort of the big emotions can come up, where we can feel very anxious. And again, we're looking at things here that we might sort of want to reflect on, the things that maybe when we're in places where the decisions that we make may not always be the best, where the way that we sort of deal with things and handle things may not always be the way we would like them to be. So I certainly know if I'm sort of going up there into hyper arousal, I know that I can feel quite emotional. I can get quite snappy with the people that I love, with my husband or with other people, or I can sort of feel snappy when I'm just watching the news or something like that. I can feel that my compassion is starting to go. I can feel that I'm sort of losing patience with people. And that's the part, that's the sort of the space where I think I can't cope. If I'm doing something, I can't cope, I'm no good at this, I can't cope, I'm rubbish, I'm terrible, and all these sort of things start to happen. Mark? And then at the bottom part, as it were, of the window of tolerance, when we're looking at it in this kind of graphic, we've got hypoarousal. And this, when we've talked about burnout today, this is where burnout would sit. So we've talked about having sort of a lack of team energy, and sort of getting to the end of the day and just being absolutely exhausted and drained. Someone used the expression drained, and that's exactly where this would sit on our window of tolerance, where we can't think. We've got to the end of the day or the end of the morning or whatever. We just can't do anymore. And this is where depression would sit. Anxiety would sit up in hyper arousal, and depression would sit down here where we feel burned out. We've got no more to give. And again, I know when I'm sort of slipping into hyper arousal, because this is where at the end of a working day, instead of doing the things that I love to do, I will sit in the chair at the end of the working day and think, I'm not going to read a book. I'm not going to do my sewing. I'm just going to watch rubbish on TV. And the evening will come and go hours later, and I've looked at a screen and I haven't even taken anything in. So again, when we know that we are going into these states, and we can go into these states sometimes, you know, in and out of these states, or getting near to these states within the space of an hour, let alone over a day. This again, I think, is just a good time to kind of stop and reflect, and just to sort of stop and think, where am I at the moment? Where do I want to be? You know, most of us want to be sort of in the middle, equilibrium, balance, where we feel safe in our comfort zones emotionally. So I find it's just useful to kind of stop and check in. If you can feel that you're sort of getting a bit hyper, you're getting a bit sort of upset and panicky with yourself, and just to sort of have things in place that we do to sort of reflect on, how am I doing? Was the decision that I made or what I did that I don't feel was kind of my best decision or my best performance or whatever, was that because I was in one of these other states? Was it because I was feeling unsafe and anxious? Was it because I was feeling numb and totally devoid of energy? And was it because I was down there? So that can be part of what you bring into your reflection. What was happening for you at the time? Because for most of us, we beat ourselves up. We think, I made that decision, it was wrong, I handled that wrong because I'm terrible. We're not terrible. None of us are terrible. It's because there's something going on for us at the time. And again, I use this slide in our trauma-informed care training when I deliver that. And I use another slide that shows the window of tolerance sort of much diminished, because again, talking about sort of what we've all been through and how much pressure's on us at the moment. Speaking for me, my window of tolerance definitely diminished through lockdown, definitely. And things that I would have dealt with quite comfortably, quite confidently, with a lot of compassion and some energy, I couldn't deal with. So again, reflection. It's about saying what was happening, where was I emotionally when that was happening, what was going on for me, and we can learn from that. Mark? Thank you. So reflective practice makes teams stronger, and it provides space. People have mentioned space today, and support for growth, which again has already been mentioned in the comments today. It gives us some space and support for our professional development and for cohesion. And again, people have mentioned this in the comments about coming together and having sort of cohesive practice and yeah, that kind of thing in the way that we work. Mark? And it gives us the opportunity to learn from one another and to share best practice. And I think what it also does, again, going back to this idea of sort of having the new person at the team meeting, it gives us all, it gives the person round the team meeting table who's been there 10 years, the chance to learn something new from the person who's just come into the team. Because we can all learn from one another. It's not down to how long we've been doing the job or whatever. We can all learn from one another if we have the space and the internal space and the physical space to do that. Mark? And reflective practice can help teams work towards personal development goals. So it can, if you recognize something, if you identify something that you really want to sort of focus on, that you want to take a deep dive into, that you want to improve or develop in yourself. I have worked with people who've identified something through reflective practice and thought, I really want to focus on, and I want to become really great at that, and I want to make that my speciality. And it can also help us to work towards organisational goals. It can help us to work towards contractual goals and outcomes. So again, it helps us all to work together. It benefits the individual, but it also benefits the organisation, which is why management are often very invested in reflective practice, because it helps us work towards our organisational goals. And of course, being able to do that and being able to meet the goals and targets and outcomes in our contracts can then help to, when it comes to renewing contracts or for funding and all kinds of things. Mark? So when we're looking at organisations that have reflective practice as part of their ethos, thank you. I wonder what happened there, Mark. Thank you. These are some of the things that we might see. And again, these are things that people have already mentioned today. It's about an organisation saying, you take proper breaks, you have breaks, and you have that time to reflect. Someone said earlier about conflicting priorities, about, and I know if it's 10 minutes to reflect or 10 minutes to help my client, I know what I'm going to do. So again, it's about the organisation being invested in giving people time to relax, to reflect, giving you somewhere that you can eat, that's not at your desk while your phones are ringing, or if it has to be because of the setup of your building. It's making sure people know that it's expected, not just tolerated, but expected, that you will turn your phone off and that you will take a lunch break, you will sit and you'll eat and enjoy and digest your food, and remember what you ate afterwards, because most of us don't. It's about providing external supervision with experts in reflective practice. And this is something that the organisation I worked for many years, BASIS, we always had external supervision with counsellors, with therapists, with people who we could change. We could have, 12 months with one person and then move to someone else if we felt that they could meet the needs that we currently had. So I've had coaches, I've had sort of NLP practitioners. I even for a little while worked with a meditation teacher as my external supervisor, because again, that was looking at all kinds of relaxation and reflection practices with her in a mindful way. Space in supervision with your line manager to talk about what's going on in a sort of a very open and honest way. Training for staff on reflective practice and also on how to look after yourself, and time together as a team to learn and to grow. So it's no point our organisation saying to us, we're really invested in reflective practice, if then we get phone calls when we're in the middle of our lunch, when we're expected to do back-to-back appointments, when team meetings and supervision get cancelled and not rescheduled. And that is not to say, I understand that sometimes things have to be rescheduled. Of course they do. Sometimes team meetings do have to be cancelled and rescheduled or something like that. Of course, we all understand that. But it's about knowing that your organisation is invested in reflective practice and in you as a team and as individuals. Mark? Thank you. So I was thinking as well today about the different ways we work. So I have worked with a big team where we're all in an office together, usually 10 plus people in the office at any one time. And if you wanted to reflect on it, something came up and you wanted to sort of grab somebody or even just say to the whole office, this has happened and I'm feeling this about it, and what do you think? And I'm thinking this, do you think that we could do that kind of informal reflection there and then? Now I work alone, sitting in my home office for most of the time, or delivering training face-to-face to organisations. But at the end of my working day, I don't go to the Homeless Link office because they're in London and I'm in Leeds, and that would take a long time to go and check in. But it does mean that my reflection now, if I'm going to do it, has to be something that I need to work at, and I need to make the space for, and I need to think of ways that my reflective practice can be a thing that I can do alone for some of the time. And then I go externally for therapeutic sessions periodically, and I can take that along. And also if I need to, I can contact the training manager at Homeless Link and have a chat with one of them. So again, just different ways that we work. So it's no point saying reflective practice has to be once a month in team meeting and it has to be a set hour, because that's not going to work for a lot of people. So we can journal if we work alone. It's often a good way to sort of get your feelings down and plan things out. I know some people do spider diagrams. I love a good mind map. There are all sort of ways that we can do that in formal sort of team meetings that happen regularly. In your in-house supervision, which is usually with a line manager. In clinical supervision, which we've mentioned, with reflective practice experts, therapists, counsellors. Having a buddy system. So again, at my last organisation in lockdown, because the whole team couldn't come together, we buddied people up. So everyone had a buddy. And in the colder months, the buddies would meet up on Zoom or on the phone at least once a week to do some support, some reflection together. And then in the summer, people would meet on the park, which was lovely because they used to meet on the park opposite the office. I was the lone person at the office holding the reins there, and I would look out of the window and sometimes I could see two of my colleagues who'd used our car park to park up in, walked over to the park, and they were sitting there on a picnic blanket having a good chat. And that just really made my heart smile to see that happening, this sort of support in such a difficult time. And then for some organisations, the idea of teams within teams. And what I mean by that is if you've got quite a large contract within an organisation, but then there are sort of smaller, maybe smaller contracts where you've got 2 or 3 people working on a housing first project within a larger team, or you've got a couple of people who are maybe working with people who are looking at getting into education or volunteering, again another sort of team within a team. And if you have reflective sessions within your smaller teams, then you can be focused on how what you're learning, what you're reflecting on, how that applies to the specific work you're doing, but then hopefully you can then bring that learning into bigger team meetings so that you can then share what your small sort of team within a team has found and share that with your colleagues as well. So lots of sort of different ways, and there are many others, I'm sure, but these were just sort of some of the ones that immediately came to mind. Mark? So for anyone who's currently using reflective practice, what are some of the things that you do? Could you just pop a few things in the chat box? Taking a much needed drink. I've got trainer's throat. Right, group supervision, using reflective practice in team meetings. Thank you, Vicky. David says that you've got facilitated reflective practice sessions monthly, which is fantastic. That's wonderful, thank you. That's great, thank you so much. Mark? So just thinking as well, I mean, this may not be something that you want to necessarily do now. It might be something that you sort of take away and just think about and share. Sorry, Karen, thank you for that. So Karen's saying there, use within case studies and have the opportunity in staff supervision. That is really good as well. Karen there obviously saying that she's requested the opportunity for peer support, which is wonderful, Karen, to actually sort of identify what would help and then ask for that. That's fantastic. Thank you. So again, as I say, we may want to think about this now and share, or, you know, some people are already doing things. This may just be something that you want to take away from the conference today. Just something that you think going forward, this is something that I'm going to take away from today, that I'm going to do just a little differently as we sort of step out of the space today, and take with you into your work tomorrow. Mark? And finally, thank you so much for today. If you wouldn't mind just responding to the last little Zoom poll again, like the first one this morning, just a tick in a box, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
That should be visible now to people. Yep, I've seen someone's answered. So I'll share it once most people have answered.
Thank you, Mark.
Answers still coming in. Any more for any more? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, I'll share it.
Thank you, Mark. So 16 responses. Thank you so much. Over 40% of people are going to share with managers and colleagues. That's fantastic. Nearly 40% of people think it feels promising, which is really great, and that they're going to look into it a bit more. almost 20% of people would be interested in attending some training. Please source some training. That would be really useful, I'm sure. Sort of a whole day to really deep dive into the subject, look at all kinds of ways to do reflective practice and all kinds of things. And almost 20% of people are already doing this. So that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mark. And the last slide, I believe, Mark. Just a big thank you to everyone. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much for your attention and your audience participation in the last hour. And I'm going to hand over now to Mike. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Shauna. You're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Joan. What a wonderful session this afternoon. No pressure on me now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Mike Wright, and I am Senior Manager for Home at Cyrenians. If I could have the next slide, please, Mark. Just thought I would start off by telling a little bit about Cyrenians before going on to talk a bit about how we use reflective practice and see if there are any sort of common grounds that we have maybe with some of the people who are at the session today, and have an opportunity maybe to reflect on that in the bit of time that we have at the end for some questions and answers. So Cyrenians are a homelessness charity based in the East Central Belt of Scotland, but with some 4 projects actually that cover the whole of Scotland, so quite a wide reach. We are aiming to tackle the causes and consequences of homelessness. We have around about 185 employees and just about 400 volunteers in the last year. A lot of our work is focused on prevention. So we have work in areas such as justice, and we do a lot of work with families, employability. We do quite a lot of work around food provision. We have a working farm. And we have a number of residential communities. And lastly, we have the pillar that I work in, which is called Home, and that is where our work for Housing First is based. It's also, we have some inclusion health work there, a hospital in-reach programme, some street outreach work, and we also have quite a bit of work around about policy and participation. Could have the next slide, please, Mark. So at Cyrenians, we offer what we call relational work or relationship-based work. The idea of relationship-based work is that we get alongside people. The intention is to form a supportive relationship with someone as quickly as we can. It's not about doing things to people. It's not about specifically going to house someone or get a job or any of these kind of outcomes, although we would expect that they would flourish as the sort of the relationship blossoms and people start to feel a bit more confident in that way of working. The onus is really about getting alongside people. I guess what we do to create that relationship, we talk about our interests with people. We find out a bit about what motivates people, what their passions are, and I guess that experience of receiving a service that way can feel quite different to people. And so it might take a bit of time for people to become familiar with that or to be comfortable with it. And people quite often want to try it out. They're maybe not certain at first, and hopefully it becomes more familiar over time. It usually involves us going to where people are rather than expecting people to come to us in a building-based capacity, and it certainly requires us to be persistent over time, really to I guess to demonstrate to people that we are going to do what we said we would do. We are going to show up. We are going to be of use to them in the fullness of time. Part of the work that we do is designed to sort of role model healthy relationships, because we understand that some people have not had the greatest experience of relationships in their lives, and particularly not caring relationships. So we aim to role model what a healthy relationship might look like. We do that so that people can hopefully work better with us, and then in the longer term, they can make better use of a whole range of relationships in their lives, including in their personal lives too, if that seems appropriate. we don't really, at the outset anyway, subject people to assessments or, bring out forms or a heavy amount of paperwork. We tend to look at it the other way around, that people are doing an assessment on us as to whether we would be useful to them and whether we are somebody that they want to have present in their lives. If I could have the next slide, please, Mark. So why do we use reflective practice at Cyrenians as much as we do? Well, it's part of our aim to offer a meaningful relationship-based service to people. And we find that by reflecting on our practice, we can change what we do or say to become more inclusive. Our experience really from our own service delivery is that people's exclusion can come about as a consequence of two broad categories, which I've got listed on the slide. The first is really about the way that services are offered or services are run for people in our area, and they can include things where where services are offered by appointment, where perhaps people are offered 3 attempts to meet with their worker, and then if they don't do it within that time, they're either cases closed or they're put back to the back of the list. It also includes service models that perhaps only focus on a single issue, such as homelessness, for example, rather than taking a more holistic view of a person's life and trying to understand the range of things in their life that might be contributing to the difficulties they're experiencing. And another common one we encounter is that the services will be for a set length of time, which doesn't really always give people time to settle into working with a particular person, and perhaps isn't realistic for everyone who needs to use that service. It's worth saying that I suppose that frontline workers are in a really, really difficult position. I feel they're kind of caught between, on one side, the dehumanizing system that shows very little in the way of compassion and flexibility. And then on the other hand, they're trying to support a group of people who are facing incredibly tough realities. You can be convincing somebody that this time things will be different for them, and all of a sudden that whole ideology falls apart when a brown envelope drops through the door telling someone that they're going to be sanctioned for missing an appointment or a particular course of action they haven't taken. What we're really trying to do with our service delivery, and I think what reflective practice helps us to do, is to not repeat some of the trauma that people might have experienced in earlier life. So that brings me on to my second point on the slide about previous life experience. If your previous experience has been that when you ask for help, that sometimes you are met with care, but sometimes you're met with indifference, and then other times you're met with anger, then it probably impacts on your willingness or your ability to ask for help again, because you don't know what you're going to be faced with. And I suppose the sort of the madness might be to continue to ask when you're met with such an inconsistent response. If I could have the next slide, please, Mark. So one of the ways that we use reflective practice in Cyrenians, and it was refreshing to see a number of people mention this in the chat in Joan's session, is sort of dedicated reflective practice groups. Over the last couple of years, those have been largely online sessions. I think the feedback I've received certainly is that people much prefer to have those in person if it's possible. We currently run those fortnightly with an external facilitator, a psychotherapist, but when they were monthly, when we were pre-lockdown times, we were doing those monthly, and we've really stepped them up just to take account of some of the stuff that Joan was referencing about how difficult lockdown has been for the people we support, but also for us as a staff team. If it is in person, we pay sort of real close attention to the space that we're trying to meet in. We're really looking for some consistency of where we meet, and that look at things like the layout of the room and things like the privacy. Can other people hear you from outside the room? Because what we're trying to do is build a sort of a safe space where people feel comfortable to to make themselves vulnerable, I suppose, and to talk about things that have gone not so well as things that have gone well. We tend towards having less managers present. We try to make it, I guess it's part of making it a safe space and for people to feel comfortable to perhaps reflect upon things that haven't gone so well. We tend to not have managers present as often. We do have external facilitation, as I mentioned, by psychotherapists, psychologists, or even sometimes CPNs. I think one of the biggest factors that we found from team members that is important is that whoever it is that's coming to do the external facilitation, that they have a reasonable knowledge of the local sector. So for our case, homelessness in Edinburgh. The time slot is also something we try to keep extremely consistent. We have them for about 1 hour at a time. We have it right at the start of the day because I think, as Joan referenced quite a lot, otherwise they tend to be the first thing that gets dropped, or they can be given up for other more pressing pieces of work that come up during the day. And we operate with a sort of a maximum of maybe 10, 12 people at a push in the room. And that's really just to make sure that everyone's going to have the opportunity to speak if they wish to. Although I realise that for some people, there's as much value in just turning up and listening as there is to participate and present something that's been particularly troubling them. Kind of things that we use reflective practice for, we talk about particular difficult cases where we maybe are unsure of a way forward and we would like to seek guidance or reflect jointly with colleagues or with the external supervisor. We also talk about things like regularly encountered maybe diagnoses that come up that lots of people are experiencing, and talk about how strategies about how we could be more inclusive around that. We talk about specific incidents or perhaps accidents or particular things that have happened or nearly happened, and how we feel about that and how that might be worked to avoid in the future. And we also, I guess, we encourage quite a wide view of the front line in terms of attendance. We try to think about people who might be answering that first phone call or answering a buzzer at reception or emails or social media, etc., because we know how important it is to get that first contact right with someone who might be asking for help, or equally, if we don't get it right, that they might not ask us for help again, and we really want to avoid that if possible. So some of the things that I guess I would look back at some of the things that we've been talking about in reflective practice relatively recently, and some of the common examples that have come up without going into too much detail are around. The first example would be around about a person who we meet quite regularly who asks for a really specific help around, say, accessing a dentist or a doctor, and we duly agree to meet that person. We set a meeting in the diary, let's say for Tuesday next week at 9 o'clock. We arrange a meeting place and we get there and the person doesn't arrive. And this cycle kind of repeats. We meet, we speak to the person, I'm sorry I couldn't make it, but I really, really want to go to that dentist. Will you please meet me again next week? And our external supervisor helps us to look, I guess, beyond the behaviour that we're seeing, and encourages us perhaps not to see that as a deliberate action of rejection, but to try and understand what might be going on for that person and how we might make that offer of support more realistic for them. It would usually involve us keeping that time aside, regardless of whether the person comes or not, and try to work on reducing the person's anxieties about attendance. I realise that's not always possible for people who've got really busy work schedules and work days, but it's about thinking about what you can do in the time that you've got available to you. Another example for us is, sadly, Scotland has got a real problem in the last couple of years, as I'm sure the whole UK has, but we have really high figures on drug-related deaths in the last couple of years. And the reflective practice group has been a really good safe space for people to talk about how they're feeling, to talk about how it impacts upon their work, to try to understand what people might be dealing with that they want to, for example, to block out or to distract themselves from, And I think it's been one way of us trying to process what's been some really difficult experiences over the last couple of years. Another one might be that we talk about a particular presenting issue. So we commonly talk about working with people experiencing anxiety, and our clinical psychologist is really good at helping us form strategies of engagement that might be able to be more realistic for people and to be more accessible generally. And then the last example I wanted to share with you was actually from my own experience. I have been working in homelessness for about 18 years, and I used to work. I've worked in night shelters, street outreach, drop-in centres, housing offices, all sorts of different places. And one of my early experiences of reflective practice was going to talk to a clinical psychologist about a person who a couple of nights previous had come to our night shelter to stay, and when he wasn't given admission because he was seen as being too under the influence of alcohol, proceeded to smash all the windows from external windows and walk down the street. And I had gone into this reflective practice session with an idea that we'll need to be talking about how long we ban or exclude this person for, because this was just a totally unacceptable course of action. And the clinical psychologist, through discussion, was able to sort of point out to me that, in fact, that this person, what they might well be doing was looking for a consistent response, and that the only response that that had been consistent perhaps in their lives was the police and prison system. That if he knew that if he committed a particular act, then he knew that what would happen would be that he would be arrested, he would be taken to a place of security, and sad as it might seem, it was probably one of the most or the only predictable things that he experienced. And it really it let my it completely, I mean, at first I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and I thought, is this person, you know, have they lost their mind? Are they sure they know what they're talking about? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized actually there's something in this, and we need to, it's not good enough to, I guess, for us as services to expect people to behave by arbitrary rules, but more that we need to look at what is going on behind particular courses of behavior and work really hard on ourselves to kind of foster inclusion. If I could have the next slide, please. Another methodology we use at Cyrenians is action learning sets. I'm not sure if they're familiar to people, and I can certainly provide more information at the end of the session if that's helpful. But action learning sets are useful where you don't perhaps have access to that external facilitation. They are a model where there's a kind of a set format. One person is appointed as a chair to ensure that the session runs smoothly, and then one member of the team can present an issue that they are having particularly difficulty with. The rest of the team will be able to ask kind of open questions to clarify their understanding of the situation, but also to help the person reflect and gain a deeper understanding of what's going on, perhaps draw on different knowledge from other members of the team. We found that the open questions work very well for this, and at the end of the session, the presenter then sort of reframes with the insight that they've gained and is able to, I guess, to report back in future sessions as to how well the advice or the guidance they received shaped how well it benefited them in the future. As some of touching on what sort of Joan was mentioning earlier, it does help us to sort of share learning across teams with maybe a variety of experiences. And we found it helps to strengthen that sort of team approach because everybody gets a deeper understanding of each other's skills and experience and their areas of interest and expertise. If I could have the next slide, please. I'm just going to take a bit of a drink, excuse me. So at Cyrenians, we have, we like to think we use reflective practice in more places than just in the sort of the dedicated sessions. We have revisited our support and supervision, if you like, or one-to-one time. and we have focused that much more on learning. We spend the time talking about what has been learned and how that can be applied and how it can be shared. We understand that not everybody enjoys group reflection, and that some will prefer to listen rather than talk themselves and might benefit more from the sort of the one-to-one approach. Furthermore, every member of staff has an annual learning review. We used to call this a performance review, but it felt a little bit kind of pointed, I suppose. And an annual learning review is much more focused on learning and asks team members to reflect upon the year, including what has not gone well as what has. The key themes from these annual learning reviews are then fed into our service and organisational planning. We work together then to see what we need to do in the future and how best to go about it. In addition, we have 2 policy and participation projects that we deliver in conjunction with St Martin's. We operate the Frontline Network in Scotland, and we have a project called All In for Change, which is, I guess it's almost like a live reference group. It co-produces responses to an Ending Homelessness Together action plan with a group of people who work in frontline services or have used frontline services. So it means that we have, I guess, we've got 2 large pieces of work going on, which are reflecting on things which have gone well and which haven't gone well. They're seeking out good examples of practice elsewhere and bringing those in to inform our discussion and debate. And then we can use those to contribute to sort of local and national debate on reform of services, etc. as well. So it's just building in that culture of reflection everywhere we go. If I could have the next slides, please. Okay, sorry, it's a bit of a large diagram, and there's a lot in there. Apologies for that. But Cyrenians, we have what we call the Cyrenians way of working, and it's built largely on our values, our 4 core values, which are respect, compassion, innovation, and integrity. And I'm going to work from the kind of the sort of the 9 o'clock position, if that makes sense. So starting with the values-led element. Our values are really explicit, thank you. Our values are really explicit in everything that we do, starting with our recruitment. There's usually quite a heavy feature on our organisational values and people's values themselves. Most of our meetings, they open with us giving examples and sharing examples of how we've seen our values in action or where we've seen others using their values in action. It gives us a real sense of shared purpose, and it helps us to understand, I guess, decisions that we've made and we're going to make in the future. Our relationship-based work, which I know I've said a fair bit about already, but reflection can also be about techniques that we use or theories of practice we use to relate to people, not to fix people, but to walk alongside them, as I said, to listen and then act if necessary. We have developed a key worker practice model that is based on Egan's skilled helper model, and all staff are trained in this, but we're currently revising it. It's being revised by people who work in and use our services, just to make sure that it bears relation to the world that we live in nowadays, and that we're taking account of all the learning that is going on, daily within our services. In terms of leadership, we are, by sharing our experiences and reflecting upon these, we're bringing changes to our own ways of working, but also across the organisation and hopefully in our networks as well. When we do this regularly and in consultations, discussions, events, we can change the system that we work within, we believe, and hopefully we can take a leading role within that. And finally, measuring and valuing. I know that nobody likes to talk about measuring and valuing really, but it does help us to see the difference we're making and whether what we've chosen to do or the changes that we make, whether they're the right ones or not. If I can have the next slide, please. So just to explain a bit of the policy context in Scotland that I think that reflective practice sits well within. Scotland has an ambition to have an entirely trauma-informed workforce, and we are part of the Scottish Trauma Champions Network. So we have a role in helping other organisations, teaching other organisations how to make themselves more trauma-informed, and we can share some of our experience and expertise from doing this to ourselves in our service delivery, but wider across the organisation. We also have a no wrong door approach in Scotland, which is really, I guess it's about what I was saying earlier about the people who answer the door, who answer the phone, etc. We want to be, our ambition is that wherever people ask for help, that they aren't turned away or signposted somewhere else. We don't miss that crucial opportunity to help people. And so I think reflective practice helps there, that we bring in as wide a range of people as possible into that discussion, so as many people as possible are able to understand what might be behind certain types of behaviour and are able to act in a more inclusive way. I also mentioned the unfortunate number of drug-related deaths that we've had in Scotland. There is a real sadness around that. There are some strong actions that have been taken by the Scottish Government in terms of a task force that's been set up and small pots of funding, but it is very much a live and ongoing issue for us in homelessness services, and it's probably one of the most pressing reasons for our frontline members of staff to prioritise reflective practice at the moment. We also, as I'm sure is going on, internationally, there's quite a bit of focus on the adverse childhood experiences debate, and I think that it's quite essential that we understand adversity in childhood and the impact that it has on people's future relationships in adulthood. And that's another key aspect where we can use reflective practice to understand why people are maybe struggling to make use of care in the broadest sense, very often through no fault of their own, but actually as a consequence of experiences that they've had. And then the final part of the policy context is that in Scotland, we're really focusing on our prevention duties at the moment. I think we have quite good sort of almost crisis homelessness legislation in Scotland, but our prevention legislation is not as strong as the rest of the United Kingdom. And at the moment, we are looking to do something about that. And I think part of the work at the moment is looking at where else do we need to be asking about homelessness in order to prevent it. So do we need to be looking at education settings? Do we need to be looking at Police Scotland, health services, etc.? And in order for us to be doing that kind of routine inquiry or ask and act approach, then I think we need to build this culture of reflection so that people who are not accustomed to always asking about homelessness and its root causes feel more comfortable and able to do so, and also are supported to deal with what might be some quite difficult things that they might hear as part of that conversation. If I could have the next slide, please. So just a few, I guess, some closing key points. I guess we understand that frontline work is really challenging. So we look for opportunities to support each other and to be supported. We really need to look after our teams like we would do in any other dangerous occupation. I heard someone speaking recently who compared it to going onto a building site and making sure that people have had hard hats and steel toe cap boots, and it really is that kind of difficult and challenging position that people on the front line often find themselves in, particularly when systems are far less flexible than people are. So frontline workers tend to bear an even greater brunt of that. The systems that we work within, whether that be homelessness, health, etc., they're largely designed by healthy people who've not had to navigate them before. And I think this is a real challenge that puts even greater sort of stress and burden on staff in the front line. And as I think tried to thread through this presentation, and I think Joan mentioned quite a lot herself, the opportunity to learn together and stay together I think it's important to build a kind of a culture of learning and support, and I think the two kind of go quite hand in hand. If your learning influences change, as I hope that people would think that it does when they're able to contribute their experiences through, and then that's taken forward into organisational planning, etc., then I believe you're more likely to remain involved and engaged with your work, and hopefully then to stay working within the sector and potentially within the organisation that you're currently in. And next slide, please. And that's everything I had for today. I've put my contact details up there in case anybody would like to get in touch to ask a bit more about any of the parts that I've talked about today. I know I mentioned the action learning sets. Happy to send people information on that or any of the other areas I've talked about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike, and thank you as well, Joan. Really interesting presentations there. So looking at the wider context about how reflective practice can be used to affect systems change and make a difference across the sector as a whole, and then looking at how it can make an individual difference in services such as Cyrenians, but also then taking that out to a broader level about how that can influence the local policy context there in Scotland. We've got about half an hour opportunity for questions. So I'm having a look at the Q&A section where I can't see any questions have been posted, but people may have posted questions in the chat. So I'm going to be having a look through there because I couldn't see it while people were speaking because I was sharing my screen. But what I'll do while I'm checking through is I'll pose a question, if I may. And I guess the question to both of you is, how do you make sure that reflective practice doesn't become sort of dwelling on things and is a positive exercise, and it isn't just an opportunity to beat ourselves up?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question, and I'm sure that that Mike's got lots of input of sort of how he does that in practice in the sessions that his organisation do. And I think it's, for me, Mike, I don't know if you'd agree, it's about having a structure to sessions. So rather than it just being everyone sort of talking about how terrible they are, because that's what we do, don't we? We all have this kind of negative bias when it comes to ourselves. We say, I did this really, really badly this week and I feel terrible, and and then people go, oh, there, never mind, and that's not, that's not helpful. So I would say it's very much about any sessions that you do. Whether that is sort of journaling on your own, whether it is sort of doing things in a big group or whatever, it's about having a structure about it, because reflective practice is not, it's not a sort of as you say, Mark, a chance to reflect on or to think about and dwell on the bad stuff and feel bad about it. It's very much a sort of a structure that's designed to reflect and to learn and to change and to take new things going forward. So I would say that the key is structure. Would you agree with that, Mike? Do you think that's important?
Yes, I absolutely agree, and I think some of the structure, for example, I mentioned in action learning sets will help to sort of facilitate that. I think when we have external facilitation, it's perhaps a little bit different for us in that we, our facilitators probably do want to allow people that chance to really kind of offload and to get out whatever it is that they're feeling. But when I'm certainly facilitating in a one-to-one type setting, I would be encouraging people to look at the sort of the harsh realities. I think some of the stuff I talked about, but the harsh realities of people's experiences and why that makes it difficult to form and sustain relationships, and to encourage people to see the reasons why they got into this type of work, their motivations, and that by being so open and having that type of discussion, they are sort of on a journey of continuous improvement, which I think is beneficial to everyone.
Absolutely. I think as well, looking at as I had the slide in my presentation about the window of tolerance, and I was saying then about it being sort of almost having a grid of what happened, how were you feeling, what had just happened, you know, so it's about sort of where were you when it happened, not sort of, well, sometimes it's about physically where were you, isn't it? Sometimes reflective practice obviously should always bring in kind of the risk management aspect of the work that we do as well, but thinking about where we were emotionally and where we were mentally and things like that. And I bring in Maslow's hierarchy of needs to just about everything I talk about and present, because again, some of that is about looking after, making sure that we are looking after ourselves physically. You know, it's not about just what we did in that moment, that when we were not being terribly good support workers. It's about, you know, were you sleeping well? Is there anything else going on? Are you eating well? Are you looking after yourself? So again, it's that whole thing about what was happening at the time. And it may be that it can be something, you know, fairly sort of straightforward, like, you know, talking to staff about, not that sleep is straightforward, I know it can be very complex, but about, are you sort of looking after your physical well-being? Because if not, how's that going to have an impact on the work that you do? So again, it's you're right, Mark, it can turn into someone sort of dwelling on all the bad stuff. And I totally agree with Mike that when someone goes into an external supervision session, that is about them getting what they need from that session. And if that's offloading everything emotionally, then that's there has to be a space for that, doesn't there? But a real sort of a true reflective practice session will have some kind of structure and focus and examination, reflection, of course.
Brilliant. Thank you both. Well, as I suspected, and the questions have started to roll in, I'm going to take a couple of them together because they're about the sort of starting point. So we have one question which is about what would be a good starting point for setting up reflective practice in our organisation. And perhaps, Mike, you could take this. And then the question I'm going to also take with that is Bernardo's, which may probably doesn't apply to yourself, Mike, but would be interested in your views on it. And then we'll go to Joan on both, is about how to present reflective practice as a dynamic and meaningful process and avoid it being a sort of tick box exercise. So I guess maybe Mike, you could speak from a sort of organisation specific viewpoint first to those about how to start off setting up reflective practice, and how do you make sure it's not a tick box exercise? How is it dynamic and meaningful?
I think you have to probably be quite explicit about it. I think you probably need to decide who's going to ask people whether you're going to have people sign up themselves or whether it's going to be something that you make compulsory. I think you need to have it as a sort of a pre-booked area of time that can't be overwritten, perhaps for a fixed period, to give people that I guess that cornerstone and encourage people to see it. Yeah, cornerstone's a good word for it. I suppose that it's an essential part of keeping yourself well for the rest of the week or month or however frequently you're going to be doing it. I think you might want to have some information in advance around about what people might expect. And you should probably acknowledge at first that it won't necessarily be maybe uncomfortable is too strong, but that you might be asked some questions that you're not asked elsewhere, and that you're going to be asked to reflect in a way that if that's not part of your normal practice, then it might feel a little uncomfortable at first. When I was involved in launching the reflective practice group at Cyrenians, I shared some real examples of what it felt like for myself and for other people who'd worked in that way in other organizations. Just to try and give people, I suppose, as much insight into it as possible. If you're starting it from scratch as an organization, it would be great if you've got at least one person who's willing to perhaps to speak. And then I think from that you can build on that. You could encourage other people to come along, just listen at first, and then think about their own work and see if they could bring other examples along in the future, if that's helpful.
Thanks, Mike. That's helpful. Joan, what are your thoughts around that?
Yes, I think Mike just covered everything there. I think about sort of giving people information in advance, absolutely. Whether that's sort of getting someone in to talk about it, whether it's finding someone on the team who's got experience of it and asking them to share. But I certainly think sort of warning people in advance is important, rather than have everyone turn up for team meeting and then say, oh, by the way, we're all going to do reflective practice today, so everyone's got to start sharing, because it can be scary, can't it? If it's not what you're used to doing, it can be daunting. And I don't think it's an option to say to people, you don't have to be here, but it is, as Mike said, an option to say, it's a safe place. So you need to be here. This is what we're all doing together, but you don't need to share, because as you know, as soon as people feel that they have to, that something's sort of expected of them, for people who get quite anxious about that, they'll be sort of focusing on the fear rather than sort of listening and enjoying the session and taking it in. So I think to sort of give people some warning about the change that you're going to bring in, tell people how it's going to be and what the structure is going to be in advance, so that people feel safe. And then, as Mike said, you know, if you've got a manager like you, Mike, who will sort of share your own experiences, then I think that's got to take some of the fear away for people. And again, with it not being a tick box, I think some of it is about what we said, both of us in our presentations today, about really sort of showing investment, showing that this isn't something, you know, like with trauma-informed care, like with psychologically informed environments, you know, it's not about just saying, oh yeah, we do this now, but they're not actually investing in it and making time for it and showing how that sort of manifests in every part of the organisation, which obviously is something that Mike's organisation do. So I think that's really, it's that whole thing, isn't it? It's not what we say, it's what we do. And I think when staff see that this is something that is invested in, that it's safe, that it's helpful, and that they're going to be able to sort of do it at their own pace, then I think that will build up confidence, and then people will feel that they're able to access it and hopefully benefit from it.
That's the way it goes. I think it grows. Sorry, I was just saying, I think that's the way it goes. Once you've got a few people invested, it kind of mushrooms from there, because word of mouth gets out, and suddenly, you know, you've got a whole team that want to work that way. And the other sort of small point that I had, tipping point, starting off, was I sat quite close to the printer, so I was able to converse with everyone who went past to use the printer and sort of suggest the idea of reflective practice, and just take those soft moments to talk about what it would be like, as well as a sort of a more formal indication of this is how the reflective practice group works.
Thank you, Mike. With the apologies to Vicky, I am going to come back to your question, but I take the next one ahead of you, just because it sort of follows on from what we were just talking about there. So the question there from an excitingly anonymous attendee is about some of the practicalities about how you build reflective practice time into the working week so that it takes into account workload. So I think you both touched on how this was very important, that it doesn't feel like something you haven't got time to do for, and that it essentially is sort of a stitch in time to save 9. What does that mean in practice? How is it sort of built in so that it actually is time that people feel they can't afford not to give?
I think Mike's probably going to be the wealth of knowledge on this, because obviously you're doing it, Mike. How do you manage to encourage people to make the time?
So when I started, I thought that the best place to put it was basically back straight onto our team meeting, which was the one time that I suppose that people were all sort of together in the one space, because the work that I'm involved in, people are largely community based, and so they're not generally all in the office at the one time. As time has gone on, I think we've moved it actually now to the very start of the day, because as much as people may have crises right at the start of the day, it still feels that people are able to join more consistently at that point, rather than if it was towards the end of the day when we found that things would just get completely pushed.
It's, yeah, again, I think it's about people seeing that the organisation is completely invested, because I think it certainly shouldn't be something that people feel that they are expected to do, but the space isn't there, because again, that's just about saying it and not doing it, isn't it? So I think it's just about the ethos of the organization, about it being something that when you go into your internal supervisions with your line manager, that although that might be about caseload, it might be about goals or KPIs and things like this, and of course, you know, we know that these things are very important, of course they are, but it's also about how much time are you taking for yourself? Are you taking your breaks? How are you about your wellness? And again, I think that's something that it's not going to suddenly change overnight. No organisation, I don't think, can say we're all going to, you know, it's all going to be about reflective practice from tomorrow morning. Just like we're not all trauma informed overnight. It's something that takes time, that there may even be a little bit of resistance and fear about and things like this. But I think if it becomes something that's the norm, that you expect that your managers and the board and the trustees and everyone is going to be invested in wellness of the team, and that they're modeling that. And that was something that Mike said that your team very much do to your service, with your service users, sort of modeling good practice, modeling good relationships, modeling these things that people may not have seen growing up. And I think that you know, management need to do that with teams of people who are probably not used to taking breaks and looking after themselves. And I've certainly many years ago worked at organizations where it was kind of almost a badge of honor to be putting all the hours in, leaving your phone on a weekend and this kind of thing. And I would hope that you know, that's not the case anymore. But certainly I think it's just something that needs to come sort of top down. It needs to be modeled. And I loved what you said as well, Mike, about everyone getting training, everyone being sort of part of, because I worked in a hostel many years ago where the lady who came in every day to do the cleaning, the women at the hostel would often chat to her about what was happening for them. And when we did things like trauma training, that person was never included in the trauma training, and yet she was hearing things from the women that may have actually been quite traumatic for us. So again, I loved when you said about that, you know, that sort of when people press the bell or they call the phone, that the person who responds to that has the support and the training and the resources that they need for them to keep them sort of safe and well, and so that they can give the best experience to the service user.
I would say it's still a work in progress, if you like, but that's my ambition, and it's certainly something that I push for regularly.
Everything's a work in progress, isn't it? But at least we're aware, and everything starts with the awareness that something needs to change, or that something could be better. It starts with that awareness, and then it grows from there.
Yeah, I guess if there's one thing we can agree on that will never be done, it's reflective practice. By its nature, it requires you to check in. So I said I would come back to Vicky's question. And her question's about one of the things that obviously is involved in reflective practice is about open and honest discussion. And sometimes that might be, in a group setting, might involve critiquing a colleague or giving constructive feedback. And some people may be very comfortable with doing that, but may do so in a slightly overly assertive way. Others may be very shy of doing that, to actually not make the points they want to make. Would either of you have any sort of particular tips about how to give constructive feedback in a sort of reflective practice setting? Whether that's to the manager or whether that's to a peer colleague.
Mike, is this something that's come up?
What would I say about that? I guess I would be, if it was at all possible, I would be looking for it to be kind of, if it could be resolved in the group setting, because I think that's the kind of the culture that you're trying to build. So if somebody, for example, communicates in a way that's not useful or is, perhaps even hurtful or whatever for other people, that they're able to somehow reflect that back to others. I think what we don't really want is to go back to a more kind of a sort of a manager intervenes to sort it all out, if that's possible, because I think the whole ethos of reflective practice is about people trying to find their own solutions. However, if that's not possible, then I guess we might. I guess it would probably be about speaking to people and having them reflect upon what their actions might come across as to others, or what their words might come across to others in a sort of a gentle and reflective way.
Yeah. And of course, feedback is a skill, isn't it? Giving feedback is a skill that doesn't come naturally, I don't think, to most of us. But it's a skill that can be learned, and we can have a sort of structure so that people can learn how to give feedback. So yeah, absolutely. And you're so right there, Mike, that it should really happen in a group setting rather than someone said something and it went through the manager and back down again. But and again, I think it's about safety, isn't it? It's about people feeling safe to give feedback. It's about people feeling safe to hear feedback. It's about people feeling safe to respond to feedback. Even if that's sort of emotionally, to talk about not just what's being said, but how what's being said makes you feel, and whether you can then reflect on whether the feelings that you immediately have maybe are putting a barrier up to you sort of taking that on board and listening. And people have mentioned today a few times about sort of feeling uncomfortable, being slightly out of your comfort zone, and really all learning and all growing potentially can push us out of our comfort zone, can't it? Whether it's sort of worrying about whether we can master a new skill or something. And I think for anybody who's done things like assist training, where we're talking to people about who are sort of thinking about harming themselves or about ending their lives, we're learning that about asking people very kind of direct questions and very honest and open questions. And so I think, again, it's about building strong, safe teams. And that's something that for a lot of us, we're having to rebuild after lockdown, isn't it? That teams that were very strong and sort of came together a lot, and that sort of familiarity that was there. Now we're coming back together again, and we've all been, as I said, we've all changed. Every one of us have changed. So it might take some time, but it's going to be worth the investment, isn't it? I think in the long run.
We've kind of lost our unofficial reflective practice groups, which I think, in my world would have been our office, I suppose, where, you had the sort of the formal reflective practice time set aside. But what you're hoping is that people take that and then it becomes just part of, everyday life, and the conversations at the printer and, by the desk are bearing in mind confidentiality, but they are reflective, and that they are supportive and sort of nurturing. And yes, I very much agree. That is the bit that we've really lost over the last few years, and it's vital, isn't it, to people?
It is. It absolutely is. Yeah.
So I think a couple of things I took from the answers there were about. One was about that giving feedback is a sort of skill that we're not born with and we need to learn, and sort of implicitly we're saying that receiving feedback is something similarly that we don't all get right the first time. And the other thing I sort of picked up was about the need for us to sort of trust in each other and trust in the process, and sort of trust that the feedback that we're giving, I'm giving because I genuinely, this is my viewpoint and I'm doing this to be helpful. And we trust that the person who's saying their piece is doing the same for us. And I think David in the chat has said about, for example, that some of the team prefer no managers at their sessions. And I know Mike mentioned that in his talk, that's something that they've looked at, about the value of that. And it may be an either or thing. I think that's really helpful. We're coming towards the end, so there is still an opportunity if people have further questions. I'm going to be cheeky and ask another. I guess my question would be, for colleagues who've been really motivated by this, who've said, yes, this is something that we're lacking or something that we've dipped our toe in the water of and we'd really like to do more of, and I want to sell it back home to my colleagues, to my manager, to my organisations. If you had to sort of sum up what you've told us in the last hour and a half, I'll start maybe with yourself, Joan, and then go to Mike. What would be your sort of headlines of why every organisation, why every individual should be wanting to do reflective practice?
I think in the work that we do,
Summarise your last hour.
I think in the work that we do, every day we have so many opportunities to learn. You know, we're working with people, and that's marvelous, isn't it? And scary and dreadful sometimes, and wonderful. And we're working with individuals who present us constantly with opportunities to learn. We're working within systems, as Mike said, that can be very inflexible, but it all gives us opportunities all the time to learn. And I think that that's just too valuable to say, well, that's okay, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, and I'm going to keep doing it the way I've always done it, and I'll live with the mistakes because that's okay, I'm in my comfort zone. And I just think that the work that we do gives us so many chances to learn, to share, to grow, and to do things better, and to work in a way that gives us satisfaction and that keeps us remembering why we went into support work, why we do the things we do. So I just think if we can do things, if we can reflect, if we can bring reflective practice into our organisations, into our work, and to grow and to help our colleagues grow and to support the people that we support in better and more innovative ways, why wouldn't we want to do that?
Lovely. And Mike?
I think, to me, it boils down to staff retention and development in a lot of ways. There's lots of varied answers to that, and I think we both covered that a bit in our presentation. But if your ambition is to, as an organisation, is to help people who are experiencing homelessness or some sort of social injustice, then I think one of the key ways that you can do that is ensure that people are not having to retell their story a number of times by having, where staff are either absent, as Joan referenced, regularly or for longer periods, or are leaving the sector altogether or moving to different jobs. I think it's a tough enough job without taking away the sort of the learning that people are having every day and acting upon that. So I think where there are opportunities to show that, yes, you are doing a really difficult job with some people who are in some really difficult situations through no fault of their own, but we're acting upon what you're experiencing and we're building that into our own organizational work plans and we're lobbying for change based on that, it feels like you're actually part of something and that there is progress being made. And I think that, to me, it would be the biggest selling point to any sort of board of trustees or management team. It's going to help you to retain staff. It's going to keep your staff happier, and the impact, therefore, on the people who use your services should be massive.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you very much. I think certainly as a manager within my own team who's responsible for looking at our reflective practice, I think there's definitely some challenges to the way that I've been doing that within my team. So that's been really helpful about looking at, about making sure that I walk the talk. And I think it's been really useful to sort of have some time to explore and sort of think about really what are the direct values, because I think reflective practice is one of those areas that I think even those of us who know little about it know it's something that is expected that we should do, but actually to sit and go like, and what are the benefits of that, I think is really helpful, because it's not talk for talk's sake. It's about talk for a purpose, about reflecting and using that to inform our practice, inform and improve the working lives of people who are supporting people in very difficult situations, as Mike said. So I think that's been really helpful. we'll probably bring it to a close there. Just to remind you now, there's a break, and then at 3:45, we're coming back for our final plenary, which is sort of reflections on the day, and also a sort of 4-nation panel discussion on looking at overcoming some of the barriers in the work of frontline staff. Reflective practice definitely sounds like that is definitely one of the ways to overcome those barriers. So thank you once again to Joan from Homeless Link and Mike from Cyrenians. Thank you all for your time, and thank you very much for your presentations.
Thank you all very much. Okay, enjoy the rest of the day. Bye.
Bye now. Bye-bye.